Hi, I'm Nicole Glenn, one of the founders and co-host of LLC Podcast. And it's an honor to introduce listeners to inspiring women who are making a real difference in logistics and supply chain. With the podcast, you'll hear inspirational stories, both personal and professional challenges our guests have overcame, how their backgrounds help shape who they are today, and how they empower others and give back to their communities and often the world. So, joining me today is Lisa Morales-Hellebo. Thank you for joining us, Lisa. Nice to have you on with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, we want to give our listeners a little insight on you and your background, where you grew up, and all the startup points of your life to make you who you are today.
My story of my earliest days. Let's see. I think all true entrepreneurs and innovators are always trying to solve a problem that stems from something in their childhood, and I'm no different. I'm Puerto Rican from the Bronx, and my parents moved me up to Westchester when I was three-ish. As far back as I can remember, I was obsessed with the fashion industry, imagery, design, photography. The supermodels of the 80s were really formative for my perspective on what is beauty and ideal, and none of it looked like me. So I also in Westchester, being one of the only Puerto Rican families or even brown families in Westchester in the 80s, we dealt with a lot of daily antagonistic bigotry and racism that was truly formative for how I impose my own expectations on myself. And I think a lot of people um, have something from their childhood that sets that expectation of having to be the best, to prove your worth. And for me, that was very much my reality. Every day I'd come home from school with kids spitting on me on the bus to give me a shower because I was so brown and dirty, and asking me, "What are you?" It was just really a toxic voice in my head that was nonstop. And so I realized my mom's words have rung true and helped me throughout my life to really focus on proving my worth. She would always say that to me, Lisita, hold your head high. You can walk into any room and add value and deserve to have your voice heard. Just hold your head high and prove your worth. And I think so many people that can resonate with and become a formative position on how you focus your life and your career objectives.
Wow. I know you talked even when we spoke the other day, it was this really emphasis on your mom's words, and she really was an early influencer of you and a role model. So would love to learn a little bit more about that on what you've gone through in that section wow section of your life that is
Yeah,
has propelled you forward today.
sure. Yeah, it really, having from age 3 until college, having to deal with daily, nonstop barrage of "you're less than" from people in my community, people in my school, the media. The imagery of fashion and beauty was, Christy Turlington and Claudia Schiffer and, all these icons that are the blonde bombshell, Farrah Fawcett even from the 70s. I mean, I
Yeah.
was a huge Charlie's Angels fan. And so all of these beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed, skinny people did not resemble anything of what I thought was beautiful and what was in my culture of Latinas. We're curvier, we have, kinkier hair, we're brown. It's a different standard of beauty. And it took so long from my childhood up until really J-Lo and Ricky Martin being the defining moment, which I couldn't be more proud being a Puerto Rican, that it was those two Puerto Ricans that redefined the standard of what is sexy, what is beauty, and what is of value, frankly. That was unfortunately, for myself, a defining moment to realize that my culture, my skin tone, my beauty standards had value. And it definitely was something that was never really seen in this industry that I was obsessed with in childhood, fashion. So it's been a real subconscious defining moment, or influence on my trajectory to want to solve for that thing from my childhood. You're less than, you're not the beauty standard, we don't make clothes for your body shape, to now be working in an industry, fashion, that I am literally refashioning through innovation and technology to better serve all the beauty standards through customization, on demand, and personalization.
Well, this is all of this resilience that you have. It's a wonderful trait. So even coming through so many challenges to be a Hispanic leader, a CEO, has made your voice stronger, right?
Mhm.
And so some of these things I would love to hear even what's led you to spearhead these numerous diversity efforts over these years.
So when I went out to Google to speak, I think it was 2014, the night before I went out to Google to speak at Latinas Think Big, I Googled Latinas in tech. And I was not finding any lists or articles featuring Latina
Mhm.
founders or Latinos that founded and built companies. And I'm like, wait, I know a lot of people that have founded and built companies that happen to be Latino. We have lists for everything on this planet in the interwebs, and there was no just easy list of people that happened to be Latino that built and founded companies. So that night, I decided to build a quick little website called LatinoBuilt.com that featured all the amazing Latino founders that I knew from within my network and give them a visual presence where you can see all the beautiful shades of Latina-ness
Yeah.
and click on them and see the companies that they founded and built, not just being, a senior executive that happens to be Latino at Facebook, or a VC that happens to be, a partner at somebody else's fund, but people of color, Latinos that have built something. So I founded LatinoBuilt.com, and that site has been cited by a number of different resources. I feel that it's really important to be visible
Yes.
because you cannot discount our presence and our impact the more visible we become. And
Mhm.
so we are growing in numbers, and not just Latinas, but Afro Latinas. Puerto Rican is Afro Latina, and the strength of the growing population of innovation and tech leadership and venture capital that happen to be people of color is filling me with pride and joy because I've been part of that growing ecosystem.
Yeah, and we're going to ask some more questions in regard to what you're doing today in that space even further. But I still want to hop into the what you're solving as far as the industry problems that you're seeing with the companies that you're running.
Yeah, so I am founder of a few companies right now because yeah, I like to stay busy.
Yeah.
So in 2017, Brian Longaway, my co-founder in Refashion Ventures and the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation and Refashion OS, we started by founding a community because supply chains are our focus, and you cannot build a supply chain in a vacuum. It requires collaboration. It requires a literal chain of orchestration between different entities collaborating to achieve a common objective. So we started with community, and the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation has grown to 4,000 members on every continent except for Antarctica, and over 40,000 in our global network of what we call our builders and buyers. And they're both sides of the equation. The builders are the founders that are dreaming up the latest innovations and use cases for emerging technologies for digitization of global supply chains, which have never existed before on this planet.
Mhm.
We think that everything is digitized because we're so used to being able to summon anything we need on our phone in our
Right.
pocket.
Yeah.
But supply chains have never been digitized before. Literally, since the bill of lading was first used in shipping, global trade shipping, back to Columbus's days and earlier, you'd get a piece of paper at the port where it's leaving, and then you better have that piece of paper on the port that's receiving it to verify something belongs to you. still happening today.
Right, right.
So we have complexity that needs to be digitized, standardized data, and then authenticated through platforms like blockchain and crypto and smart contracts and NFTs. All these latest buzzwords are finding their use cases, which are most relevant in the supply chains. So the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation exists to connect the builders of those innovations with the buyers at the
Hmm.
largest enterprise companies to have real meaningful conversations about their innovations before they get their one chance to actually pitch it and wish they had the insights of actually talking to the people before they
Right.
got that pitch. So the community is thriving. And then we started on building a fund. But before the fund really started taking off through our Angelus rolling fund, I happened to have a global fashion brand reach out to me at the C-suite and ask, well, you've been talking about localization for years now of apparel supply chains. Can you just build what you're talking about for us? And it was hard to say no to this massive global fashion brand. So I decided to spin up another company and got a team together. We worked on productizing the localization of what I call demand chains. This is designing something, having it purchased, and then producing it. So your volume is literally a unit of one, and your volume shifts to your raw materials, which now can be locally sourced and regenerative textile fibers. So we can keep reusing the same fiber assets over and over again without needing to, frankly, grow another thing on our planet. That infrastructure doesn't exist today. So of course I got excited, was like, ooh, something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yes, I would be happy to. Nobody else seems to be taking up the mantle to try this really hard thing, so why not us? Unfortunately, sent over the final SOW on March 18th, 2020, 2 days before the world went boom with COVID.
Right. Yes.
So we knew that SOW was going nowhere, and we shifted our attention to helping US factories not go out of business during COVID. We helped them get tech packs for making PPE, the right raw materials, the right viable purchase orders, ISO certifications, whatever they needed to help them find a new way to stay in business. And through that process, IBM reached out to me, Jor, the largest wholesale retail platform, offering support for what we were doing, and then Gerber Technology. And Gerber is the largest US based hardware and software producer for apparel, soft goods, and furniture. And they had seen me talking about localization and said, you know what? We have a microfactory for apparel. And I said, shut up. So well, I went and took a tour, and we realized that they had done this holy grail integration where you can walk into a microfactory as they had it set up, have two photos taken using 3D Look to get your exact measurements, have that translate into an avatar where you can design, I want a dress or a t-shirt, button down, whatever, pick your neckline, your sleeve type, your print, see it rendered on your form with your right measurements, and then hit print. Goes to the digital non-toxic waterless printer, cures molecularly into the fibers, then goes to a Z1 Gerber cutter that digitally cuts it, and then sends a digital bill of lading to the digital sewing machine to reset the stitch type and foot pedal. So the seamstress can just go zip, 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 all within 10 to 15 minutes.
I was
And I
going to
was
say,
like,
watching that, I was going to say, how did you feel? Because that's been part of your vision.
mm-hmm.
And to see that come to actual life with a
It,
product being made, you had
I
to be
was I was a kid in a candy store. Like, I
yeah,
knew it was happening. How
yeah.
many? So I immediately asked, how many of these have you deployed? Oh, kind of goose eggs. What? How much does it cost? Well, $2.2 million.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. I've been talking to these factory owners. They're mostly generational, third generation. They, don't want to be the generation that lays off 300 people in their local community and ruins their family reputation. And they're struggling to get by. The industry has literally changed out from under them. And they can't just keep doing the old model faster.
Right.
When you go from 500,000 unit orders to 50,000 units, to 50. your product development timeline still takes as long as it takes.
Yeah.
So you're trying to do everything with shorter returns and outcomes, saying yes to everything because the order variables are so intense, you don't know what's going to fill your pipeline, and just everything is breaking. So I thought, this is a solution. We need to build the business model to get it into the US factories. And that led us to founding our own company, operating company of REFASHIONed OS, where we are deploying a licensable model using all of our existing investments from our now fund to deploy this infrastructure in existing apparel cut and sew factories so they can have this upgraded, digitized infrastructure with zero cost and zero risk on their part to do these integrations and take on the capex through our company. So that is underway and scaling. And then in 2021, Brian and I finally got our Angelus rolling fund going. And since July of 2021, we now have done 13 deals across our 4 investment categories, which include data and AI, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, and advanced logistics. And 3 of those 4 categories involve physical atoms, which most venture funds are terrified of, which is mind-boggling to me, because if you look at the number of funds that are saying they're trying to decarbonize our planet, hello, you're not going to do that through software alone.
Right, and that was one of the things we spoke on was this sustainability. You know, it's a
Mhm.
huge buzzword that I mean, you can see so many articles, there's companies with focus on it, but are they really? So it's that concept of, what you're doing in the sustainability part. I'd love for you to just give a 1-minute
Yeah.
overview on that because that could be a show in itself, you know?
Yeah.
So could you just touch on that for our
Sure
audience?
thing.
Yeah,
So when I first met Brian, I had just I had founded the New York Fashion Tech Lab in 2014, and I left after the first cohort because I was speaking behind closed doors to the C-suite of all the major brands and retailers, and I thought, I solved it. You're welcome, industry. I'm just bringing this horse to the water. They're going to
yeah.
drink and invest in the innovations that will save not only the planet but their company's future existence. But no, the C-suite was investing in shiny objects. And by that, I mean things that weren't foundational to their bottom line margin, how they can increase their margin and create efficiencies for their overall operating. You can't just throw in agile consumer facing experiences to try to drive more purchases with a static back end. You need to create agility on both the front and back end, and it requires innovation in supply chains. And frankly, I saw the brands weren't taking on the mantle themselves, and I left to study the apparel supply chain for a year on my own dime and tied everything I learned back to what I'd done in Silicon Valley 20 years prior for a Procter & Gamble and Redpoint Ventures backed startup that was really spun out of P&G, where we pioneered the space of mass customization, personalization, and on-demand micro manufacturing, a one-of-one product that didn't exist until you created it online. And so we had a 22-year head start on the rest of the world, really being aware of what's possible. Tying that with everything I learned in my year of research on what's broken about our current global supply chain, I realized it's literally the definition of insanity to think that we can try to retrofit and create circular and sustainable systems on what is a billion-headed beast of global infrastructure partners that make up our current globalized apparel supply chain, and where the opacity is a feature, not a bug. Don't get it twisted. Oops, we didn't know there were children. And, it's so many tiers down of sub-tiered suppliers that create this opacity that is frankly going to be impossible to try to rectify in time to save humanity's existence on this planet. Then you couple that with insights that I had learned in my research. Fashion touches every other vertical on this planet. When you think about it, there's only really 2 uh, industries that we really need to interact with every single day of our existence, and that's food and clothing.
Mhm,
There are homeless people. They
mhm.
don't need shelter. I mean, everyone wants shelter, but you need food and clothing. You don't need banking. You don't need retail. You don't need a lot of
Right.
things.
Yes.
So food and clothing, it touches every human on this planet and every other industry. So I then looked into their impact. It is one of the largest polluters for carbon emissions, water usage, toxic chemicals, slave and lack of fair labor practices, children in their supply chain. It's just gross.
Yeah.
So if you want to truly make an impact, we need to not just look at incremental shifts in this billion headed beast, we need to look at entirely refashioning the way the system works from the ground up. And I realized it was cheaper and faster for us to build a better new paradigm than it was to try to retrofit our current old, ugly one. And that's where I came up with the vision for a localized, distributed collaborative network of on demand microfactories. Much like blockchain gives us agility, resiliency, redundancy, and authentication, trustless authentication, if we create this distributed network with a universal data layer on top of it, we can have the same agility, resiliency, redundancy, and authentication. So if you have the only certainty being change
Hmm.
and increasing risk for our globalized supply chains and even our localized ones, you need to distribute that risk. Hence, we don't reshore and build mega factories in California or, the Midwest somewhere because a tornado can come through and wipe out that one mega factory. To distribute your risk, it's more efficient to have these micro facilities that can replicate, and you can digitally send all of your production to the next closest clone factory if there is some massive disruption, which
Sure.
certainly there will be.
Sure. So I kind of want to shift gears a little bit because you're so inspiring to women in what
Thank
you're
you.
doing. And I want to ask a little bit more about, I know we've talked about your climb and we've talked about some of the different things that led you there, but when you're speaking to women, and I'm going to say, like, you weren't handed anything from any age, it was
No.
always go get and learn and kind of create your own, well, definitely create your own path. What advice do you give to women that are really in any stage of their career? They could be just starting out of college all the way up to running their own business because you've done all of that.
Yeah.
What are those most important tidbits that you could share?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of expectations that women put on ourselves, and then there's even more that society imposes on us.
Mhm.
The roles, and every single woman I've ever known is like, oh, well, I need to plan out when I'm going to get married, when I'm going to have babies, what that'll do to my career timeline. Like, what? Who says? Like, take control of your own destiny. There's so many people that I've known that seem to think that their career happens to them. No, you can plan it and you can actively control the outcomes you want to achieve. But you also should be open to new possibilities, and the thing that usually scares you the most is what you should be trying to do. So
Mhm.
if it means leaving your job to start up your own company, take that leap and build your airplane after you've jumped, off the
Yeah.
cliff. It really is something that is seen as being brave and fearless. And I'm like, well, women are brave and fearless all the time.
Mhm.
We just need to learn to be brave and fearless for ourselves rather than for others, because that creates opportunity where the sky is the limit. People want to put us in these boxes or give us glass ceilings and keep us in our path. I can't tell you how many times I've had older men tell me that I should wait my turn. And like, no, thanks. You need to actively seek out the people that find value in you and your own uniqueness, your own
Mhm.
expertise and beliefs and insights, and what you want to bring to the world. Because once you surround yourself with people that see your value and want to amplify it, suddenly the world is your oyster. If
Yeah.
you're constantly finding yourselves running into brick walls or glass ceilings, change the people that are around you.
Mhm. That's what I've said. I've heard that often where, I mean, even some of my close friends worked at companies and they clearly said to the women, we can't put you in this position. This is a male role. And the women would stay. They would
Yeah.
stay. And I'm like, you guys should all just leave. Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense. Like, you don't have to accept that. And
Mhm.
that's something that you live and breathe every day. And that's amazing. So
I'd
with the,
much rather take the gamble on myself
yeah,
than put my potential in somebody else's hands to grant to me like my fairy godmother that I'm suddenly worthy of their value.
yeah, that's amazing. So for myself, I have one other question for you in this. It's, if you had to give one life lesson that you overcame that helped you propel in your career, what would that be?
I think it definitely is a personal inward thing. When I realized at Techstars that I had made every decision in my life trying to prove my worth. I only applied to Carnegie Mellon. I got in on scholarships and grants. I graduated with honors. I wanted to work at Vogue. And when I was interviewing there, I got a call from Herman Miller, which I learned was 4,500 students applying for 2 positions. And I got that job. I went to work at a CMS startup, a content management software startup, where I was design manager number like 3 of 20 employees, and I had to teach myself how to code in PHP and JavaScript and build 2 websites using this new languages I just learned and software to deploy 2 websites in 2 weeks to bring out to Siebold to then present and talk about. I did it. Just,
Mhm.
challenge yourself. Men assume that, if I'm applying for a role and I have 3 of the 10 things, yeah, I'll apply. I'm awesome. Women will be like, I only have all 10, but what?
Right,
No.
right. Yeah, I'm missing one, and so I
Yeah.
probably won't get it, and so that is maybe that self-doubt that we
Yeah.
have, that just not ready to leap because we don't check all the boxes.
I think it's
Yeah.
really just I had that fearlessness, but what I didn't have a true understanding of was that I was still surrounding myself with the wrong people.
Mhm.
And so I would change my jobs to because I reached that ceiling. Rather than actively looking for the right people, I was looking for the right learning opportunity next, rather than the right people with the right learning opportunity. So I think it all comes down to understanding your expertise and value lies in
Mhm.
what makes you different, not the same.
And it
And
seems like comfort zones.
yeah,
You just go, "I don't ever wanna be in one of those."
no, I think that's my gift of
Yeah,
having been uncomfortable my entire life and never fitting in anywhere and constantly dealing with all these outside voices leading to becoming comfortable with discomfort.
yeah.
If I'm not ever settled or comfortable in a space, I try to create comfort and comfortable spaces for others, and that's my superpower. And applying that to technology, I don't think there's enough innovation around sympathy and
Yeah.
understanding other people's frailty and emotional needs. And I think that is the core of where diversity in tech adds value. It's not that, yay, we have a woman coder. Great. No, it's her lived experiences and the lens that she has experienced the world through that she can bring to this company that creates the value.
Wonderful. So I wanna ask you one last question. We only have, like, a minute and a half, but
Mhm.
you have a family and a
Yes.
business. So how do you juggle all of that? What do you
Oh,
do
you know,
with that superpower? Yeah.
yeah, I think I was just talking about this yesterday, texting with a founder that was asking me if I had a recommendation for a designer. And I was like, no, I do all of our design for everything, for all 3 companies. And she's like, what? I said, yeah, eventually I'd like to offload it when we have an operating budget. But right now, you, a hack that I found is that you can achieve a task in a week or in 5 hours. You basically need to set your own framework for what is the deliverable, what's the best, smallest, achievable deliverable that gets to the objective, and focus on the steps to achieve that deliverable in the least amount of time. If you give yourself 5 hours, you can achieve a deliverable in 5 hours.
Mhm.
If you give yourself a week or a month, it's going to take you a week or a month.
For sure.
So,
For sure.
because I have so many things going on, I carve out my calendar to be like, okay, this is a block where I'm working on these things for this company, and I need to get those items checked off my list in that
Mhm.
time. And I do. So, if you want something done, ask a busy person because they know how to compartmentalize and achieve things in smaller bites of time
Mhm.
because you have to.
Well, we're at the end of our show, so I want to close, but I do want to ask, you have so much content out there that can really help people. So I would love for you to share a way that people can read some of that content or look you up on LinkedIn. How could people get in touch with you for questions
Sure
or
thing.
yeah,
You can, if you Google me, a lot of content comes up. My LinkedIn is actually supply chain localization. If you go to LinkedIn, most people have their name as the URL after linkedin.com/in/ whatever your name. Mine is / supply chain localization.
awesome.
Because that's how much I'm deep. This is the future. The rest of my life is dedicated to this. And then refashioned.com is our fund, and that is the word refashion with the letter D.com. Most people think, oh, refashion ED. Nope.
Right.
We intentionally spell it without the D. It's part of our brand, or without the E. It's part of our brand. And let's see, you can find oodles of content, both video content and articles I've co-written, and content my co-founder has written. He's a, a a true research analyst and prolific writer. So if you want to do deep dives on specific segments within supply chain technology, he has a ton of content and white papers. And then he collectively, with me, has written a few white papers on supply chain. One is called The World is a Supply Chain. It's a downloadable PDF book. And we have our latest white paper is on how family offices can collaborate with early stage emerging funds to yield higher outcomes. So lots of content out there. Feel
There
free to
is.
hit
And
me
we're
up
gonna put
even
a
on
link.
Twitter.
We're gonna put a link too on we didn't get to talk about it, the book that you're featured in. So we're gonna
Mm.
put that underneath the
Oh,
show so
yes.
people can find that as well. But Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your story, your vision, and your mission with us. We appreciate it very much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.